Dear brothers, good morning, fellas. Great getting up, waking up with all of you again. For those of you who are awake right now, of course. Some of you slackers might still be sleeping. But I want to so I have this really cool book that I picked up in a local shop, just a used store, and I was going through their little book section and I came across, it's a Harvard classic, and it's the Thoughts and Minor Works of Blaise Pascal, who is kind of a mathematician and theologist of sorts back in the 1600s. I won't tell you any more about who he was because it's a lot. And his writings are actually incredibly difficult to break down and understand and read. But I have this book, and at night when I'm kind of going to bed and I'm looking for something to put my mind at ease, there are times where I'll just pick it up and start reading it. Well, I was reading it a couple of nights ago, and there was a section that popped out that really stood out. As we've talked on here a lot about being the heroic man. I've used that term a lot, and I think that that's really ultimately what we want to become, is the heroic man, which is the character-driven, godly man who is looking to work and to keep and to contribute to this society in a way that is life-changing. But this passage popped up and it really stuck out to me. And he says this: we should not be able to say of a man, he is a mathematician or a preacher or eloquent, but that he is a gentleman. That universal quality alone pleases me. It is a bad sign when, on seeing a person, you remember his book. I would prefer you to see no quality till you meet it and have occasion to use it, for fear some one quality prevail and designate the man. Let none think of him a fine speaker unless oratory be in question, and then let them think it. So, like I said, it can be a little convoluted to read the man, but I do think it is important, fellas, that when people talk about you specifically, what do they say? And the reason I say that is, let's say that you are a terrific businessman. Excellent. Maybe you run a company, maybe you are the manager of whatever your branch is, whatever. But when people think about you, Jon Snow, they say the absolute best in the financial world that I've ever known. Great businessman. Now, would you prefer them to say that, or would you prefer them to say, oh, John, that guy is a gentleman. He is a great man of character. He is a heroic man. That alternative is far more important. And the reason for that being is that it illustrates to us that they are not just their business. They are not just an athlete. You might see the same thing where, oh, John is an incredible basketball player, incredible athlete. I would much rather that when people talk about you, when people think of your name, they think, what a gentleman that guy is. What a heroic man that guy is. Not only is he effective at business, but he is a great and ferocious friend. He's a fantastic husband. He's an excellent father. He contributes to his local community. He takes care of his health. He gives to others. That's what I want us to start thinking about. I think it can be easy for us to get pigeonholed into being identified as something like, oh, In my own example, I'm a physical therapist. I'm a strength coach. I'm a podcast host now, apparently, which is terrifying to consider. But those are just attributes. They're just things I do. They aren't who I want to be more broadly. They're not who I'm called. I'm called to work. I just so happen to work in those things. I think that's probably where we're getting to here is people have to identify with what they do for work. And I don't want us to do that. I want you to always think to yourself, when people look at me, I want them to say, like Pascal said, that you're a gentleman. And I love that he says that universal quality. In a lot of his writings, he talks about how he prefers to dabble in multiple things, be good at multiple things. And there's a point to that I actually agree a lot on. I think we can all have our niches in life that we work through. But having multiple streams of knowledge that we have something that we know about actually is pretty vital. But when you talk about being a gentleman, or we'll say being a heroic man, that is a universal quality. You can't just be a good father. You also need to be a good husband. You can't just be a good husband. You also need to be a good friend. You can't just be a good, businessman. You have to be a character-driven businessman. And those are all various tacks that life brings to us that we have to approach. Being a good father is different than being a good husband. They may have some overlap. Being successful in your business is going to be different than raising your children. Again, maybe there's some overlap, but understand that people should think of you in that broad sense, because that means that you are contributing to those areas of life in a way that means something to people. And so that was really what was on my heart to talk with you guys about today, is really focus on the broader world that you're trying to be involved in. When I think about my friends, when I'm thinking about a specific friend right now, when I think of him, all I see is gentleman. He's put together. He takes care of himself. He's a phenomenal father to both of his boys. He's a terrific husband to his wife. He works unbelievably hard. He's a character-driven man. He's a godly man. And so when I just look at him and I look at this broad scope, I don't see him as, yes, he actually happens to be a great physical therapist. He happens to be a good he happens to be all those things, but it's summed up in the sense that he is the heroic man. And I think all of us in some capacity should strive that when people think of us, we want them to think, wow, that is the kind of man I want to be. We all have our flaws. We have our stuff. We have our junk. But when people look at you, aim to be that broad category, which God calls us to be, in fairness. We are called to be that, I'm going to use the word Renaissance man, if you will, that is able to do all of these things and do it with a grateful heart and with grace and with a passion for being the best version of ourselves. I'm going to leave it at that for today. I think that's good. Blaise Pascal is the name of the man that I quoted, and his stuff, like I said, is extremely hard to read because you're trying to understand it. And he was a mathematician, and so he talks a lot about mathematicians and rational minds and how they can't coincide. And there's quite a lot to it that I am quite simply just not intelligent enough to understand yet. If you guys are interested in learning more about him, you can do that. In other news, boys, it's a blessing as always to talk with you. I love you all. God bless. Be strong. Get after it today. And when people talk about you, make sure that they say, that's a gentleman. We'll see you, boys.